Aloha and welcome to Faith in Politics, where we aim to discuss politics through the lens of faith, both here in Hawaii and around the world. I'm Brian Lau and I'll be your host for this episode. In today's program, we'll be looking at a national bill that will be voted on soon, and if made into law, will change the way that we travel in the US. We'll also take a look at CBN's latest national headlines. But first, we have a special report from Real Impact Town Hall, a monthly meeting that discusses current political trends from a Christian perspective. Dr. Jeffery Barke, co-founder of Personal Concierge Physicians, shares preventative protocols in dealing with COVID-19. Here's what he has to say.
I know what you kind of came here to hear me talk about, and that's COVID. I want to assure you that you should not have fear. I want to assure you that fear is the true contagion, not the virus. And the government and the mainstream media wants you to live in fear, because when you live in fear, you can be controlled. When you live in fear, they will force you to do many things that you otherwise wouldn't do. So please don't live your life in fear. This virus can hurt people, there's no question about it, but it's mainly the people that are in high-risk groups. And those are folks that have significant underlying comorbidities. Even the CDC recently came out and said 75% of all COVID deaths have at least 4 significant underlying comorbidities. Things like diabetes and heart disease and cancer and obesity and on and on and on. Even Emperor Fauci himself came out recently and said the majority of hospitalizations for COVID are not hospitalizations because of COVID, they're hospitalizations with COVID. Meaning you go in for some other reason, you go in for gallbladder surgery or a hernia or chest pain or whatever it might be, and as is the hospital protocol, whether you're ill or well, they test you. And these tests just simply are not accurate enough to be used the way they're being used. So now you go in with a broken hip and they test you and you test positive for COVID, even though you don't have any symptoms, and now you're a hospitalization for COVID. So don't let the media mislead you when you hear these numbers that the hospitals are being overwhelmed with COVID. They're not. There are a lot of people in the hospital that has nothing to do with COVID, and they just happen to test positive. I don't even recommend testing anymore. You know, there's an expression in medical school that we're always taught. We don't treat test results, we treat patients. So I don't need a test to tell me how to treat you. And under no circumstances, in my opinion, should a healthy person that has no symptoms be tested. You know what it's the equivalent of? It's like me telling women, you need to go in and get your breast biopsied. No mammographic evidence, no lumps that you can detect, but we just want to make sure because breast cancer is very fearful. That's kind of what we're doing. We're over-testing. I saw lines of people, of cars, hours long. Reminded me of the Jimmy Carter era when people would line up to get gasoline. And these are healthy people sitting there in their cars with their car running for hours to be tested against a virus that they're not even at risk. Wow. Speaking of risk, why on earth would we vaccinate a child against an illness that they're not at risk with an investigational vaccine that has no long-term safety studies? Why would we do that? In my opinion, under no circumstances should we be vaccinating children. There's just too many unknowns with this messenger RNA vaccine to be putting it inside our children. But here's the reason why they're doing it. They have to do it. Under emergency use authorization, vaccine companies have immunity from liability. Under emergency use authorization, liability protection. If a vaccine is approved for an adult, the liability protection goes away. Under California law, if a vaccine is added to the childhood schedule, there's liability protection for the vaccine companies. So in order for those vaccines to be given to adults and approved for adults, they must first be given to children and approved for children, so the vaccine companies have liability protection. That's why they're coming after our children.
Yep, that's right.
And I do think that's evil. It just doesn't make sense that we should be doing this. In 1986, a law was passed by the US Congress and signed by the president that gave vaccine companies liability from all, protection from all liability. And what was supposed to happen is a reporting to Congress was supposed to happen regularly as to vaccine injuries, vaccine side effects, and so forth, but that never happened. But we do have a vaccine injury site that has reported vaccine injuries, and that's called the Varicite, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS. This is not some crazy right-wing site run by some QAnon people, right? This is a site that's run by the government. It's run by the Biden administration, CDC, and FDA. Yet they discount this site. There's been over 17,000 deaths associated with this vaccine. Now, this isn't causation, it's correlation, but these things need to be investigated. And by the way, under penalty of law, you are reporting to this system. So if I report fraudulently, I could be arrested and fined for doing so. It's also difficult to report into this system. It takes a long time to register, to log in, to make a report, and so forth. Not to mention the numbers of injuries and side effects that are occurring as well. Now, I'm not anti-vax, but I am pro-choice. And I think it's important that anybody that gets a vaccination should have informed consent. What are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the potential complications? And then you can decide as an adult whether you want to participate. But that's not what's happening now. You're being coerced. You're being bribed. You're being forced, like those Kaiser employees, for fear of losing their job. And many of them aren't as courageous, and they say, okay, my job is more important than my own body, and so I'm going to get the vaccine. But there are some courageous nurses and doctors that are standing up. And so whether it's your business that you're being forced to be vaccinated against your will, or somebody that you know, encourage them and stand up with them. Stand and fight with them. If we all stand up together, these vaccines will go away. We can't comply our way out of tyranny. Our compliance allows the tyranny to continue. Emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of individual liberty have been eroded. And once they are suspended, it is not difficult for anyone who has assumed such emergency powers to see it that the emergency will persist. That's F.A. Hayek. He's the guy that won the 1974 Nobel Prize in Economics and wrote the book, The Road to Serfdom. We're seeing that and living that now as Governor Newsom extends the state of emergency, extends the mandatory indoor mask mandates. We're seeing that now, and we can't comply our way out of it. We have to stand up. It's time for peaceful civil disobedience. We must stand up to this. The virus is very easy to treat. It's not difficult at all, but nobody's talking about it. We know that there's a direct correlation between low vitamin D level and bad outcome for COVID-19. If you did nothing else but measure your vitamin D and make sure it's in the upper level of normal, you'll be in a pretty good shape. If you do nothing else but have a nose-throat rinse protocol with dilute betadine or hydrogen peroxide and have that at the ready as soon as you get symptoms, you'll be better off and you'll reduce the symptoms and the duration of the illness. About 6 ounces of water and a splash of betadine, that's providone iodine, or hydrogen peroxide, squirt bottle, snort it up, spit it out. Wash it down maybe with a little Listerine or Scope to get the taste out of your mouth. Do that if you're at a super spreader event and you're worried that you've been exposed, or start that immediately at the first sign of symptoms. If you did nothing but that, we could save lives and prevent hospitalization. But there's more we can do. And Dr. Fauci and company should be standing up on the tallest buildings, shouting this at the top of their lungs. Early treatment works. I have never in my career seen an infectious disease where the treatment recommendation is stay at home, isolate, and if you feel like you're going to die, show up to the hospital and we'll help you die by giving you remdesivir. I've never seen that happen before. Early treatment works. Vitamin D, nose-throat protocol. We have repurposed medications. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, inhaled budesonide. These products work, especially if we can get to you early. And now we have monoclonal antibodies, and those can be very effective. But guess what? The government now has gotten into the distribution business. So of course they're in short supply. There are some newer drugs that have been approved that are made by Pfizer and other companies. One is called Paxlovid. Listen, I'm perfectly happy to have more tools to help me treat you. So the more the merrier. But we need to start talking about early intervention, not vaccinating our way out of this pandemic. And here's the problem, and I'm gonna leave it at this. All these variants that we see coming out. I think there's a reason for these variants, and it's not what you think. This is not a pandemic of the unvaccinated. More and more we're seeing vaccinated people getting ill. I have a dear friend that works at CHOC, Children's Hospital of Orange County, and I'm on a text chain with her, and she was kind of laughing about this, that she was called into work, she's unvaccinated, because so many of the vaccinated nurses were out sick. And she was with a crew of 4 unvaccinated workers, unvaccinated nurses that were working in the ICU. And she said, what an irony. We can't vaccinate our way out of this pandemic, and the more we try, the more we're going to see immunologic pressure on the virus to mutate around these vaccines, because that's what viruses do. They want to live. They ideally don't want to kill the host so they can continue to live. So as we massively vaccinate in the middle of the pandemic, we're putting pressure on this virus to mutate. And we'll see more mutations. You can count on it. You can count on it like the governor extending this emergency.
Yeah, that's right.
So my message to you, if there's one thing I want to impart, that is, don't be afraid. Please don't be afraid. If you go on my website, RX4Liberty, RX4FORLiberty.com, I've got that nasal throat recipe on there under COVID treatment. I have a link to physicians that do telemedicine that you can get in contact with. There's a great curated site called earlycovidcare.org. It's on my website. You don't have to write it down, but earlycovidcare.org, and it curates multiple websites where there's a listing of doctors in your area that are willing to prescribe some of these early treatments, or telemedicine doctors that you can get in contact with. So we all live in California here, at least that are here locally. I know this is being broadcast around the country. But in California, we're always taught to prepare for the big one, the earthquake. Have water, have food, know how to turn your gas off. Be prepared so when the big one hits, you can take care of your family. Same thing with COVID. Be prepared, not scared. And the things you can do to be prepared are find a doctor before you need it. It's so scary to have symptoms and you know you have COVID and you don't know who to turn to for medical care. Find that person before you need help. Whether it's a telemedicine doc or it's a local doc that will treat you with early treatment. Get the medications that you know you'll need, whether it's ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or inhaled budesonide. Talk to a doctor about getting these medicines at home, so if COVID comes calling, you're not panicking because you don't know what to do. Be prepared, not scared. And if you do that, then you can walk around proudly, you can walk around self-assured, you can walk around without fear, knowing that you have early treatment. I've treated hundreds of patients for COVID in all risk categories, all age groups. And if you can get to people early, regardless of the risk category, most people do really, really well. And if you're in that high risk group, you got diabetes, heart disease, you're overweight, then do the things to correct those comorbidities to put yourself in a lower risk group. It's important. You're in charge of you. Get some exercise, get some sunshine. Show up here to church and pray, and be prepared, not scared.
That's Dr. Jeffery Barke speaking at the Real Impact Town Hall. After the break, Dr. Barke will be interviewed by Gina Gleason with practical questions about COVID-19. We'll be right back.
Nobody delivers good news to Hawaii like Kalo TV delivers the good news, because we're the only local Christian TV station that's right here on island with one singular mission: to take the message of Christ even further. What is our mission? You, the body of Christ, encouraged, growing, empowered.
Come and join us.
Can't wait to meet you. Help us spread the good news. It only thing missing is you.
Come on out!
Kalo TV, broadcasting aloha 24/7.
Welcome back to Faith and Politics. Gina Gleason asked Dr. Jeffery Barke practical questions about COVID-19. Let's join in on the conversation.
So let's start with the first question. Is COVID here to stay? Are we going to be dealing with it for the rest of our lives? What should we expect with it?
Well, I'll tell you, if the media and government had their way, I think COVID is here to stay. Listen, my belief is this is not a natural virus. I truly believe that this virus was created in the Wuhan virology lab using gain-of-function research. I think the evidence is showing that. This is nonsense that it came from a bat or the wet market. The only question I have that isn't clear yet is, was this released purposefully or was it released accidentally? And we may never know, because the Chinese Communist Party will never cooperate with that investigation. So I think the virus, the natural cycle of these kind of viruses as they mutate, is to get less and less virulent, so less dangerous as time goes on. So I have a feeling it's going to be with us, but just as this new variant Omicron is milder than Delta was, I think whatever the next variant that comes along will likely be even milder. And as time goes on, we'll learn to live with it, just like we learned to live with influenza.
Okay, good answer. But tell us the difference between the flu and COVID and some of the symptoms that people are experiencing.
Well, I'll tell you, the CDC has told us that the early Pcr tests could not differentiate between COVID and influenza. And so a lot of these COVID cases that were marked, a year ago, when we heard that influenza disappeared and we were only seeing COVID, I think were actually influenza. Symptoms are very similar. Viral symptoms, body aches and chills and fever, cough, etc. So influenza, the illness, is very similar to COVID, the illness. And so it's hard to differentiate, and you can't always differentiate, which, by the way, is why I don't think testing is particularly helpful. I'm going to treat you for your symptoms based on how you present. I don't need a Q-tip up your nose to tell me what's going on. And I think all this testing that we do just creates more unnecessary fear. I mean, I have patients now, and it's hard to teach them differently, even my patients. They wake up with a stuffy nose and they want to immediately come in and get tested. And you can't find test kits. So there's this mad rush and short supply of test kits. And I tell them no, and especially the ones that have no symptoms. Well, I'm going over to so-and-so's house and they want everybody tested. I'm like, that's ridiculous. People without symptoms don't transmit the virus. Dr. Fauci has told us this. I mean, have you ever caught a cold from somebody that doesn't have a cold? If you're not sneezing and coughing, you're not going to transmit this virus. So if you feel well, you're not at risk of getting somebody else sick. I mean, what's wrong with us? What are we doing? But yet, so many people are wanting to test. I had a patient today, she's got COVID, and I talked to her on the phone earlier, and I called her up because I got a lab report that a test was positive. I called her up and I said, hey, how you doing? She goes, well, I'm waiting for my test result. I go, well, didn't you do some home tests? Yes, I did 3 home tests and they're all positive. Well, why'd you do the second home test? Well, I wanted to make sure it was accurate. Well, why'd you do the 3rd home test? Well, I'm just a little OCD and I just wanted to double check. Well, why'd you come into my office and do the 4th test? Well, that's a PCR test. I thought it was more accurate. So this is not unusual. I know it's funny, but this is not unusual thinking. We've been taught now. We've been taught to be fearful. My co-host of our podcast, if you ever listen to the podcast, it's a lot of fun. It's called Informed Dissent. And it's on all the podcast channels, Apple Podcasts, and so forth. My co-host is a psychiatrist in LA. His name is Mark McDonald. He's a lot smarter than I am. He's super smart. And he just wrote a book called The United States of Fear. How we've been, indoctrinated by a mass psychosis, a mass delusional psychosis. We've been taught to be fearful, and then the government and the media continues that process. And they're reinforcing that process. It's like somebody with OCD. You know, if you know anybody that has OCD, they have to wash their hands 18 times, check that the door is locked 10 times before they can leave the house. It's the same thing. We're being taught that way. You know, I have to do a test. I have to do a test. Oh no, where do I get more tests? I have to do a test. It's insane. I can't remember what the question was.
Okay, so you mentioned the PCR test, and you're telling people they don't need to be tested, but that's like the big talk nowadays. You know, the president is sending out tests all over the country. You can get free tests, and there's lines and all that kind of stuff. So why are there 2 different tests, and why is one supposedly better than the other, and what's the deal about the test?
The deal about the test is the public is buying into this delusional psychosis that testing and vaccinations and masking is the way forward. It's not. So the home test is an antigen test. So it's detecting a protein that's in the virus. They're reasonably accurate. We do these tests for like home pregnancy tests and things like that. They're pretty accurate. They're not perfect. Mm-hmm. And then the PCR tests are very problematic. They were never designed to be used diagnostically. And the PCR polymerase chain reaction, it's measuring genetic material from dead virus. So it's not even telling you whether you have an active virus or just residual dead genetic material in your nose. And the problem is the mechanism by which this test is done. It's called cycle threshold. It's like a picture that you keep magnifying. So they magnify the genetic material over and over and over and over again until it tests positive. And early on, we were using a cycle threshold of like 40 or higher, when the test really shouldn't be any higher than 25. So when you go in and get a PCR test, you need to know that. What are you using for the cycle threshold? And if it's any higher than 25, I don't believe the result. And these tests are notoriously inaccurate, both false positives and false negatives. And so that's really the basis of the 2 tests. So please don't test yourself if you have no symptoms. And don't be scared if you have mild symptoms. Be prepared, not scared. Start immediately on a nose, throat, rinse protocol. Look on my website. The recipe is there. You don't even need to look on my website. 6 ounces of water, a little splash of hydrogen peroxide. Squirt it up your nose, spit it out your mouth. If it burns a lot, dilute it more. It shouldn't burn. Maybe a little, you'll feel a little tingling. Dilute it if it's burning. And do that if you're worried. Do that with a common cold. This stuff kills virus. Hydrogen peroxide or betadine is virucidal. It kills viruses. So a lot of people do this anyways. My wife does this routinely with saline because she used to get sinus infections. A lot of people use neti pots to clean out their sinuses. It's a thing. And it should be a thing with this virus as well.
Okay, so let's say a person has had COVID and they have natural immunity. Explain what that actually means and why is our government refusing to accept natural immunity?
When I was a kid, I had chicken pox. And the reason why I had chicken pox was my mom took my brother and I down the street to the neighbor's kid's house who had chicken pox. That's what we did, right? And so, we got chicken pox and whatever, and oatmeal baths and calamine lotion, the whole bit. And then, a week goes by and we're back to school. This was way before we even had chicken pox vaccines. And recently, I tested myself. I wanted to see, wonder if I still have immunity to chicken pox. Sure enough, I still have high titers to chicken pox. This is 50 years later. So we believe that the SARS-CoV-2 virus, it's a type of coronavirus, when you get infected with this, you're going to have long-lasting immunity. Peter McCullough, arguably one of the leading COVID experts in the country, maybe even in the world. By the way, we've interviewed him twice on our podcast. Really fun interviews. He's super smart. This was maybe a month ago, and he said, one and done. Once you've recovered from COVID, you're done. You're not going to get COVID again. Now, Omicron kind of threw us for a curve. So you can get Omicron if you have natural immunity, but the Omicron is more like a natural immunity boost. It's very likely to be mild, like a bad cold for a handful of days, and that's going to further boost your immunity. I have a lot of patients that remember getting sick the end of 2019, early 2020. They were really sick with what they thought was the flu. We didn't know about COVID at the time, and now we test their blood, and sure enough, they have COVID antibodies, or if we can't detect the antibodies, there's another aspect of our immune system called T-cell immunity, and you can test for that as well. And that also imparts immunity from the variant. So the belief is if you have natural immunity, you recovered from COVID, at worst, if you get Omicron, it's going to be mild. And if you do get Omicron, it's very unlikely you're going to get Omicron again, and these new variants you should be protected from. So we think that, obviously it's new, so we don't know, but the belief is of many of the epidemiologists, at least the ones I listen to, that this natural immunity should be long-lasting. And you're right, why aren't we counting natural immunity? We know we can't count vaccine immunity. There are lots of people I know that are vaccinated that are getting sick, and some of them, not just mild illness, but severe illness. So if we're going to differentiate between anything, it should be immunity or no immunity. And the immunity group, fine if you want to count vaccine immunity, but we also need to count natural immunity too. And I hope we get to that point.
So you mentioned that you could find a doctor on your website that would be helpful in treating people with COVID. Tell us about these doctors. Are they all over the country? Are they regular MDs? Are they in threat of losing their licenses? Or what's going on with these doctors that are online?
They are all over the country. It's estimated that there's about 250, 300 doctors that are part of America's frontline doctors that do telemedicine. Peter McCullough has suggested that this small group of doctors has taken care of something like 25 to 30% of all COVID cases in the United States. There's not enough of us. We're recruiting for new doctors that are willing to provide telemedicine services. So if you go to that site, earlycovidcare.org, you can find it on my website. There's a link to it. This curates multiple organizations together. Doctors that do telemedicine. You can search by zip code in your own area if there's a doctor locally that will prescribe for early treatment. So find those folks before you need those folks. Start with your own doctor. Hey, doc, if I get COVID, are you comfortable with early treatment? What do you mean by that? That ivermectin stuff, that horse dewormer. And if the doctor says no, we'll move on. Ask your friend or family member who had COVID and maybe got treated, where'd you get your treatment from? And then reach out to that person to get the medication that you need so you're not panicking to try to find it. Unfortunately, most commercial pharmacies This is evil and this is disgusting. Most commercial pharmacies, Rite Aid, CVS, Walgreens, Save-On, etc., refuse to dispense ivermectin. I just spoke to a freedom-fighting pharmacist at a CVS out in the San Fernando Valley. She contacted me through social media. We had a nice conversation. I go, "Are you allowed to prescribe ivermectin?" She said, "Well, they leave it at the discretion of the pharmacist, but we really have to have a solid reason behind it. Otherwise, we get punished. Otherwise, we could lose our job." And she's looking for a new pharmacy to go work for that values freedom and values freedom of choice. It's easier for me to prescribe you OxyContin, to prescribe you Vicodin or Percodan, than it is for me to prescribe you ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. And I used to have these conversations with pharmacists. My wife would stand there listening. I tried to be polite. "Why won't you prescribe it?" "Well, there's no studies that da-da-da." "Well, it's not approved." I go, "No, it actually is approved. It's approved for a lot of uses. We use products off-label all the time, every day. Something like 20% of every prescription written in the United States is written for off-label purposes. So why won't you allow this?" "Well, it's dangerous." "Oh, in your career, how long have you been a pharmacist?" 28 years. "In your 28 years, have you seen a single overdose from ivermectin?" "Well, in your 28 year career, have you seen a single person injured from hydroxychloroquine?" "Well, So, listen, it's a waste of my time to do that now. So we were able to identify the pharmacies that will prescribe. There are various, it's usually the mom and pop pharmacies or the compounding pharmacies. And some of these folks reach out to me on social media. "Hey, Barke, I got your back. I'll help you out. Call me. I'll mail prescriptions wherever you need it." Literally, there's a Patriot in San Diego that reached out to me, a compounding pharmacy. So they're out there, and sometimes it's your local mom and pop pharmacy. Call around. Joe Bob's Pharmacy on the corner. Call them up. "Hey, will you guys dispense ivermectin?" Now you have a place. Now you just need a doctor.
That's Dr. Jeffery Barke and Gina Gleason at the Real Impact Town Hall. After the break, we'll continue the interview as they speak about preventative measures in dealing with COVID-19. Stick around. You don't want to miss this.
We have a mission here at Calo TV. We continue to be the only local Christ-centered media outlet in Hawaii. God has planted this station to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs.
The church needs to just stick to the scriptures.
She was like this as a little girl.
Running around.
Yeah, running around. Yeah.
Showcase solid biblical teaching.
We reach more people in one day with the broadcast of the gospel.
It's music to God's ears.
Improve our infrastructure and influence social media. Are you willing to labor with us for Hawaii, for your ohana, for the next generation? Go to calotv.com and partner with us today.
Welcome back to Faith and Politics. Let's continue with Gina Gleason and Dr. Jeffery Barke discussion on practical protocols when dealing with COVID-19.
The people that are working in compounded pharmacies, those are the ones that are giving bioidentical hormones to women, that are doing different thyroid things to help patients, that are having a more natural approach to the practice of medicine. And those are folks that honor medical freedom as opposed to the retail pharmacies. God, some of these retail pharmacies, it's unbelievable. First of all, it takes sometimes 10 minutes to finally get somebody on the phone, and it's typically, "Hi, we're really busy. Can you hold, please?" Click. And then the on-call music. You're like, "Oh, please." And then the pharmacist, who's busy as all get up, "No, I'm sorry, the pharmacist is giving vaccines right now. Can you call back in 15 minutes? So I literally stopped using them. I have a handful of go-to pharmacies. I direct all my prescriptions, not just COVID prescriptions, high blood pressure, cholesterol, whatever it is. I said, forget it. I'm stopping using you guys. Your customer service is terrible. You don't value medical freedom, so I'll send my business elsewhere. And these other pharmacies are fantastic. There's one pharmacy, I don't know if it's out here, it's called Now RX. Now RX. They're a delivery-only pharmacy. They don't have a brick and mortar. And they honor medical freedom. You call them up, call in a prescription, you call them up, the very first prompt is, hi, welcome to Now RX. If this is a doctor, press 1. Oh, thank gosh. For Spanish, press 2. For Vietnamese, press 3. You press 1 and immediately, hi, this is pharmacist so-and-so. How can I be of help? Oh, hi, Dr. Barke. So nice to talk to you today. What patient needs help today? It's like a business that cares about service. Gosh, and these retail pharmacies just think that they have the market cornered and people don't have choices. You do have choices.
Still talking about pharmacies, when you mention vitamin D and other supplements, do people need pharmaceutical grade supplements, or can they get these at the Walmart or
Get them
Costco?
at your favorite vitamin store or even on Amazon. It's hard to harm yourself with vitamin D. I always recommend you measure it first and then take the appropriate amount. Generally, that's around 5,000 international units a day. It's cheap, super cheap, little teeny pills, easy to swallow. So vitamin D is so important, maybe one of the most important supplements, especially during COVID time. Cheap to measure it too, cheap and simple. Any doctor's office can do it. LabCorp, Quest, any commercial lab, they all do this. And the other supplements that I recommend on my website as well, but vitamin D, zinc. Zinc disrupts viral replication. If you get COVID, escalate the zinc to a higher level, about 100 milligrams a day. Vitamin C. I love those little emergency packets. You pour them into water, they taste good. You get 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. So I think that's important as well. Even melatonin. Melatonin, not to help you sleep, although it may do that. Melatonin has immune modulating properties and can act as an anti-inflammatory. If you look at the FLCCC website, Frontline COVID Coalition something, website by Dr. Pierre Corey. He has an actual protocol, outpatient treatment of COVID. You can print it out. You get COVID, you can bring it to the doctor and say, will you please follow this? And it lists supplements. It lists ivermectin and some other interesting medications. Fluoxamine, Luvox. What's that? It's an older generation antidepressant primarily used to treat obsessive compulsive disease. It works in COVID. It helps reduce inflammation, can reduce hospitalization. The beauty of this FLCCC website is it's referenced. Here are the studies to back up the recommendation of using X, Y, and Z. It's fully referenced as well. And so the earlycovidcare.org brings together multiple sites with protocols, including Pierre Corey's protocol, which is the primary one I look towards to kind of guide me, and then I use variations of the theme.
And how long should we be taking these supplements? I mean, is this a lifelong thing, or is it just for 30 days and build some immunity up, or how long are we?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think some of these supplements are good just to be taking independent of COVID. Like vitamin D is, even before COVID, was one of the supplements that I recommended most often. In my practice, we routinely measure vitamin D just as part of an annual exam. And it's amazing how many people have low vitamin D levels because we've been taught to fear the sun. Can't go outside, SPF 300, slather on your sunscreen, stay away from the sun.
How much sun do they need every day?
Like 10 or 15 minutes in 11 o'clock sun is really all you need. But we wear sunscreen when we go out, we wear long sleeves. Vitamin D is so critical for mental health, for cardiovascular health, for the protection of cancer, and your vitamin D level being below normal. I see it almost every single day. I look at it and go, oh my gosh, you've got like vampire level of vitamin D. Oh, I know. I had skin cancer once, so I never go in the sun. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. So, okay, fine, we've prevented some skin cancer, but at what cost? We never ask that question. How come? At what cost? What are the consequences of telling our kids to wear masks all day long? Whoa, you know, stops. It doesn't stop anything. It's not my opinion. These are the opinions of every healthcare expert right up until, you know, early in the pandemic. The New England Journal of Medicine, Dr. Fauci himself, the World Health Organization, the Surgeon General, on and on and on told us respiratory, surgical, and cloth masks do little, if anything, to prevent the spread of respiratory disease. My wife and I fly a lot because kids live, you know, back, whatever, Milwaukee, and now my son's back at Hillsdale College, so we got to fly to go see him. That's the only time I'll wear a mask. And whenever I get on the plane, first of all, I always look left into the cockpit. I want to know who's flying the thing. And if I'm allowed to, I try to, you know, give the pilot a fist bump and say, hold the line, right? Some of these pilots are being very strong and courageous with some of these vaccine mandates, so I want to give them a little love. And guess who's not wearing a mask on the airplane? The pilots. What the heck is that all about? So the two guys in the front of the plane that are flying it, or girls or whoever, they don't have masks on. Recirculated air, somehow that now new barrier locked door somehow stops COVID from spreading. How come they don't have to wear a mask and all us turkeys in the back have to have a mask on? And as if I'm sitting 6 inches away from somebody with my cloth mask on, like that's going to prevent me from getting COVID? We've lost our mind. Mark is right. Mass delusional psychosis. And we're all in part guilty of this. It's insane.
Well, that's the buzzword right now. Mass delusional psychosis.
That's right.
Have you all been hearing about that?
Read Mark's book. It's paperback. It's thin. It's really easy. United States of Fear. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful book. Take a look at my book, too. It's kind of fun. COVID-19, a physician's take on the exaggerated fear of coronavirus. Early in the pandemic, I started just writing essays. It's a way I just sort of, you know, rather than screaming at the world, I sit down. I wrote an essay about my experience on the airplane where this poor little guy, this poor man dragging his kids along, his mask slipped down, and this idiot, you know, crossed the aisle, put your mask on, put your mask, and he's got these kids, his mask is sliding down. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I wrote an essay about that. So I wrote a bunch of these essays. And then my father-in-law, who is in the publishing business, said, hey, we should put it together as a book. I'm like, all right, that'd be kind of cool. So we're about to release the 5th edition. So I update the essays, I add essays, and it's been a lot of fun. I've been honored. I got Dennis Prager to write the foreword to my book. And the sage Larry Elder wrote a little blurb on the book too. So it's been a lot of fun. So that you might enjoy that. It's on Amazon, but if you want to bypass Amazon, you can get it directly through my publisher on my website as well.
Okay, so that sounds like something we all need to buy because, you know, we're always looking for more information. But now let's switch the topic a little bit more to the doctors and to the nurses that are, I guess there's policy changes now. They're saying that these nurses and doctors who do test positive can actually go in. What's that all about? And
what's all about is a staffing shortage. So my nurse friend that's at CHOC, Children's Hospital of Orange County, ICU nurse, I mean, they're all these nurses and doctors are going out. Almost all of them are vaccinated, of course, but they're still getting sick. So, you know, the CDC said, well, you know, listen, we need the people there. So you're going to get fired if you're not vaccinated, but if you're sick, you can go back to work. Just wear a mask. Now the reality is masks can work, right? An N95 mask. So my local hospital, a couple times a year, has mask fittings for people that work in the hospital and have to go into sick patient rooms. It's usually done by a nurse, and you go there. I've done this before. It's been many years. And there's several different sizes. They fit it to your face. They teach you how to wear it, squeeze the thing over your nose, pull it back, you know, around your ears and so forth. And then equally important, they teach you how to take the mask off. Because if you're exposed to something, you don't want to now, you know, manhandle your mask and so forth. So if you are working in the hospital and you go into an infection room, whether it's COVID or something else, you're not just wearing a mask, by the way. You're wearing one of those little beanies on your head, to cover your hair. You've got a gown on. You've got gloves on. You walk into the room, you do your thing, you examine the patient, you walk out of the room, and now there's a proper mechanism to take off the protective equipment. So you take off your mask, and what you don't do with that mask that you just took off is slide it over your forearm. You don't stick it in your back pocket. You don't hang it over your rearview mirror. You take the mask off and you put it in the hazardous waste bin. So you're telling me that kid who's going to wear a cloth mask all day long, sneezing and coughing and exchanging it with their friends and on the face, off the face, touching it and down, you're telling me that's going to offer any level of protection? We've seen the highest suicide rate we've ever seen. We've seen the highest level of depression we've ever seen in our children. We've seen mental health problems just crazily. We've seen learning disorders because those poor kids, not only can they not bond with their friends, they can't see facial expressions from their teachers. I agree with my co-host Mark McDonald. Forcing a child to wear a mask is a form of child abuse, and we shouldn't do it.
So my understanding is that this legislative year, we're going to face legislation coming out of Sacramento that is going to require our children to be vaccinated.
Could very well be. I'm expecting that to occur.
Right. What do we do about that?
Leave the government schools. Stop calling them public schools. They're government-run schools. I'm lucky I don't have little kids that are in the school system. My wife and I have talked about this. If we had little kids, there's no way in heck they would be in any government school. We'd either be homeschooling them, they would be in a private school that shares our values, or they would be in a charter school that shares our values. But the traditional public school system is dead. Not only are we not educating our kids, we're indoctrinating our kids, we're over-sexualizing our kids, we're teaching them things that aren't true, and we've got to stop doing this. And the best way to stop doing this is you parents and grandparents, you have to pull your kids out of those schools. And if you're not going to do that, then run for the school board. A whole bunch of years ago when my kids were little, a group of parents were very frustrated by what was going on in our elementary school. And we decided that the only way we could make a change was make a change at the top. And I drew the short straw, and I decided to run for school board. I'd never been elected to anything. So all the mama bears in the community got together and acted on behalf of me, and holy crap, I won the election. And then 12 years later, the unions didn't like me. Los Alamitos Unified School District, one of the top, whatever that means, school district in the county. What does that mean? Well, at the high school, 45% of our kids were below grade level in math. This is not downtown, in some slum area. These are very affluent communities of Seal Beach, Rossmore, Los Alamitos. How possibly could 45% of our kids be below grade level? So I said, I've got an idea. Why don't we create a financial bonus pool for the teachers? Do a benchmark at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, at the end of the year. The teachers that made the greatest gains get financially rewarded. No, Barke, you can't do that. Why not? Uniform compensation system. Teachers have to all be paid the same. Okay, fine. How about this? Why don't we prevent kids from doing after-school activities like playing on the football team or basketball team or being a cheerleader unless they're up to grade level in math? And we'll help them. We'll give them tutoring. No, you can't do that. Why not? Because some of the kids would drop out of high school if not for playing sports. All right. How about this? Why don't we give every kid a voucher? We have all these, Mathmasium and Kumon and these tutoring centers around. Let's give every kid a voucher and allow them to go twice a week until they're up to grade level. How about that? No, Barke, you can't do that. Why not? Because that would imply that our own teachers aren't capable of teaching the kids. It's like, hello, is this thing on? So the teachers union ran a former teacher against me. They outspent me about 10-1. They had teams of union members that would walk the district, and I ended up losing by about 15 votes. But God had bigger plans. If not for that loss, I would never have founded Orange County Classical Academy. So our goal is to grow the school and put charter schools throughout Orange County, and God willing, we'll be able to do that one school, one building, one classroom at a time.
So back to Governor Newsom and legislation that's going to be coming out of Sacramento. What can an individual school district do to fight back with this new legislation?
Well, hopefully the boards can fight back, and if you have a freedom-loving board, they can pass resolutions like my school did. We passed a resolution saying that we will not mandate vaccines for our children, and Sacramento sent us back a very nice letter in response. So they can do that, but ultimately, if it comes down where they're about to pass a bill to mandate a COVID-19 vaccination for our children, I would expect that we should have hundreds of thousands of people descending upon Sacramento saying we will not put our kids at risk. And if enough of us stand up and enough of us say, if you do this, my child will no longer be in a government school, then they will change the rules, because with your child comes the education dollars. And if your child isn't in school, they won't have the money, the unions won't get funded, and those schools will close down.
Yes. And this is where you all come in, because as these bills get introduced, they'll be given a bill number. They'll be given votes. The legislators will take votes through the policy committees that they have to go through. If you sign up for the Real Impact Action Alerts, you are going to get notified when these bills are up for a vote. You're going to be asked to call your assembly member or your senator and make sure that you tell him or her that you want him or her to vote no on these bills. That's the only way this is going to be cut off. It has to be in the committee process when it gets to the floor of the Senate or the Assembly, but we need to speak up, because they are going to listen to you if there's hundreds and thousands of people speaking up. If you aren't saying anything, they're going to do whatever it is they want to do.
Absolutely. You must
right?
speak up.
You understand? You think that your one vote, your one phone call is not going to make a difference? You are totally wrong. We have been able to fight back. This past year, 2 bills that were called a gut and amend, I know it's a technical term, but we were able to fight back 2 important bills that were going to mandate vaccines for employers and just to go into a building. And we fought them back because people spoke up. We're going to need even more this year. This year is going to be one of the worst legislative years I have ever seen. So don't hesitate to fight back. We need your help.
Special thanks to Real Impact Town Hall. Great practical things we can all do to stay healthy and not live in fear. You're watching Faith in Politics. We'll be right back.
Nobody delivers good news to Hawaii like Kalo TV delivers the good news, because we're the only local Christian TV station that's right here on island with one singular mission: to take the message of Christ even further. What is our mission? You, the body of Christ, encouraged, growing, empowered.
Come and join us.
Can't wait to meet you. Help us spread the good news. It only thing missing is you.
Come on out!
Kalo TV, broadcasting aloha 24/7.
Welcome back to Faith in Politics. Here's a snapshot of headlines from CBN News.
We begin with President Biden dealing with multiple issues in his extended news conference Wednesday, marking the end of his first year in office as his poll numbers continue to fall, even among Democrats. George Thomas brings us this look at what the president has to say, including the possibility of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, his attacks on Republicans, and more.
President Biden's press conference lasted almost 2 hours, fielding a host of questions from the economy to dire inflation numbers, the bungled Afghanistan withdrawal, and the ongoing COVID crisis. But a good chunk of time was spent on the escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Biden believes Russia's President Vladimir Putin is planning to attack Ukraine.
My guess is he will move in. He has to do something.
Newly released satellite images show Russia continuing to amass tanks, artillery, and military troops along Ukraine's border. Russia has more than 100,000 troops deployed, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned that number could double on relatively short order. While Biden warned Putin of serious consequences of invading, he seemed to imply that a smaller incursion into Ukraine would not prompt massive sanctions.
It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia.
However, at his news conference, the president also said NATO countries aren't exactly unified on their exact response to Russia.
There are differences. There are differences in NATO as to what countries are willing to do depending on what happens.
On the eve of the one-year anniversary of his swearing in, the president took a defiant tone on his domestic accomplishments, even though major parts of his agenda have stalled and Americans are increasingly frustrated with his administration.
Can you think of any other president that's done as much in 1 year? Name one for me.
Despite rising inflation and COVID numbers surging, the president was asked if he overpromised to the American people.
I didn't overpromise, but I have probably outperformed what anybody thought would happen.
The president repeatedly blamed Republicans for his inability to get anything done, even though his party controls the entire federal government, including Congress.
I did not anticipate that there'd be such a stalwart effort to make sure that the most important thing was that President Biden didn't get anything done. Think about this. What are Republicans for? What are they for? Name me one thing they're for.
Asked about his approval ratings, which have plummeted over the year, the president said he didn't believe in polls. A new survey out Wednesday shows more Americans disapprove than approve of how Biden is handling his job as president, 56% to 43%. And as of now, just 28% of Americans say they want Biden to run for re-election in 2024, including only 48% of Democrats. George Thomas, CBN News.
Thanks to the CBN News team. Oh, and don't forget, you can watch CBN Daily right here on Color TV. In closing, we want to make sure you're aware of a bill that will be voted on soon. Bill HR4980, authored by Representative Richie Torres of New York. And it states, to direct the Secretary of Homeland Security to ensure that any individual traveling on a flight that departs from or arrives to an airport inside the United States or the territory of the United States is fully vaccinated against COVID-19 and for other purposes. Simply put, this bill proposes that domestic travels in the U.S. will only be allowed for the vaccinated. As this country is run by we the people, you can voice your opinions about this bill by contacting the offices of the sponsors of this bill. As you can see, two of the co-sponsors are Hawaiian representatives, Kylie Kahele and Ed Case. Make your voice heard today. Well, that's all the time that we have for this episode. Once again, thanks so much for watching Faith in Politics. This nonprofit program exists because of support from viewers like you. If you believe the content we are providing is important, please consider donating. Also, we want to hear from you. Has Faith in Politics helped you navigate the political landscape? Are you facing situations that you would like us to talk about? Contact us today. For those watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Oh, one more thing. We are excited to announce that in February, Amir Safati of Behold Israel will be joining us in studio for Faith in Politics. You don't want to miss this. Again, thanks for watching. I'm Brian Lau for Faith in Politics. Till next time, aloha.